Hello, I'm Delea, and welcome to another Soul Horse Sunday. And my guest today is Brittany. Is it Ashworth?
Yes, it is.
I'm saying it right. And she has a business called Sacred Echoes, and I will have you introduce yourself and talk about that. And then at the end, I will also ask for your contact information for that, and I'll put it in the notes on the YouTube video so that you can, the audience can look up and find your contact information. So Brittany, go ahead and introduce yourself.
Okay, thank you. So my name is Brittany. I am in Kamloops, BC. I have, my business, Sacred Echoes, as you said. And so my business is all about the animal. And so I kind of have like two avenues. One of my avenues is partnering with horses, my horses, and I have another herd that I sometimes use in a healing capacity to help people, mostly women, kind of self-reflect on things that they're moving through, and we use the horse as a conduit to showing that. And then the other half of my business is animal communication, and so doing sessions for people and with their animals, and supporting through transitions and tough times and things like that. So that's kind of me and what I'm passionate about and kind of what I do in the realm of Sacred Echoes.
Do you do communication with all animals or just horses?
No, all animals. All
Okay.
animals. So, I mean, my mom uses me for her chickens. Like,
oh, funny. Yeah. Yeah. They're animals too.
Yeah.
Okay. So, maybe you can start by, I don't know, have you had horses your whole life?
So, I can kind of start there because it's one of the same. So no, I haven't had horses my whole life. I got into horses, like my first horse is what got me into horses. So, what actually ended up happening is my sister bought him because she already had a horse, as a family horse. And I mean, me being blind and resistant to his ask, he was very obviously my horse. He was very obviously for me. He came with an injury that no one could doctor besides me. He and I just like had a very palpable connection. And so my sister ended up gifting him to me. And then he blew up my life into what it currently is. And
so he was the invitation into the world of the spiritual connection between horses and humans.
Yeah. So when I got him, I was a little bit on my spiritual journey, but not truly. And he had lived a life. I was his 13th owner. He was 18 years old. He was an off the track thoroughbred. And a lot of his mannerisms, you could, and so I was lucky enough to have a mentor that was on the spiritual side of things. And so the first session I ever got from him, he actually fully said that we could transition to him and he would be very actually happy with that choice from us. And so he was in a state where he required me to step up and really support him in a way that he hadn't been before. And so my journey with him was, it was non-negotiable. I had to go there. I had to learn the things. I had to choose to show up and partner with him in a way that was supportive and what he needed from a human. And so he really started my whole journey into what it meant to truly have a partnership with a horse, what it meant to truly look at their needs and how I could support him, whether it made me feel comfortable or not, because we were at a facility with lots of different people. And so I had to do things for him that maybe made me uncomfortable, my humanness uncomfortable, because I have eyes watching me. And so that was kind of my start into horses and into anything spiritual.
Okay, so I want to talk about this second, because a lot of times recently what came into my world is that, people like you and I, we think we have this woo-woo audience and we're in such a small niche. But I've really begun to look at a bigger picture of everything and how that people who don't necessarily pursue woo-woo are still people who are very often involved in a spiritual path. They just don't maybe talk about it so much. So when it comes to spirituality and with our horses, maybe we could just chat a minute about what that would look like. So for a person, like I know people who are just innately spiritual and they don't talk about it. They don't even think about it. It just became a part of them as they entered this life. But it shows up in ways that, number one, they're very kind and very understanding. And I think that is a witness as to someone's spirituality. Something that is more inclusive of other species as being worthy is just an example of spirituality. It isn't always someone who, it's not about meditating or about studying, spiritual growth or trying to get answers in a way of form of communication or downloads or whatever. So what are your thoughts on maybe everyday people, everyday horses with spirituality?
Yeah, so this is such an interesting conversation. And then just before this call, I read something about someone saying that using crystals was woo-woo. And I was like, oh, that's interesting that someone would feel using crystals and stones is so out there. And so I think it's really important to recognize that what our definition of what those things are is so vastly different. And so for someone using like essential oils with your horse is like really out there, or, doing something because your horse wants it is super out there. And then there's also so many people doing things that they don't recognize as, it becomes normal. And so I agree with you. Like a lot of people are doing these things already. And because they're normal, they don't see it as that. And so, I've never had my horses on my own property. I've always boarded. So I see a lot of different things and a lot of different horses and a lot of different people. And I can point out the horses that are more, or I can notice the horses that are more spiritually connected and in that realm of things, and asking their owner to step into it. And often the owner feels uncomfortable with that ask, but that horse has come to you for that reason. And so whether you know it or not, the way the horse is in partnership with you is supportive of that, like the whatever you want to call it, the spiritual side, the woo-woo side. And it's like, it's those things that you do because your horse likes it, or it's those things you do to support your horse in the best way that you can. So it's like, oh, you know what? I feel like my horse wants to go for a walk today. Right? That is like, in my opinion, having a spiritual connection with your horse. It's like, it's recognizing what might be supportive for the relationship between the two of you, or the being within yourself. It's like, oh, I'm having a bad day. I'm just going to go hang out with my horse. Right? It's like knowing that connection supports that bridge for you, or, hopefully I'm answering your question.
Yeah, no, because I'm notorious for taking my horses out to dinner. I took them out to dinner last night, and I'm lucky I have places to do that.
Yeah.
Where I live, there's a campground and a back arena area, and the area around it is kind of park-like, and there's water into the surface, so there's grass year-round. So I can take them. I have to just hand graze them as I go, and then there's a big turnout in the front by the big barns. And I took them there last night and just turned them loose for about 2 hours and just let them graze. I take my horses to dinner, and that for me, I mean, it's a nice thing to do for the horses, but it's actually a spiritual place of connection for us, because then I get to be around them and I get to bring back balance to myself. And right now, because I just retired from my hair job, I'm going full time into this other work, and I'm moving back to Colorado. I have a lot on my plate, and I really need to remember balance. And the best way to do that for me is by spending time with my animals. So to me, that is a spiritual exercise, or a spiritual adventure that we do, is when I take them for a picnic. I go up to one of my favorite places and we hang out for 4 or 5 hours. So it's not just, it isn't that I'm sitting there in meditation with them. So those small acts of how we connect with our horses, or other animals as well too, is part of our spiritual process, I guess, is what you would say. It's where we remember, and we build our spiritual strength that way, is what I should say.
Yeah. And I would say even being present with your horse is a meditative practice.
Right.
being present.
Right. And then there's something you were talking about, your horse feels like it wants to go for a walk. And something that, and being under scrutiny, maybe in a barn where that's not a common type thing to ask your horse, or to be able to feel from your horse or interpret from your horse. Because something that I kind of run into eyes with is I'll say my horse said no. Like Enchantress said no to shoes, metal shoes. I mean, she stood still while the farrier put on the right front. She stood there, and when she put her foot down, she licked and chewed and said no. And there was no getting any more shoes on. Well, okay, that's a fair enough request if we can find another option, but she has very, her feet are white and they really chip. She has to have hoof protection. I can't keep boots on her. So I started getting into the whole, I have it here all over my hands now, from putting on glue-on shoes. And it was a huge process and undertaking for me to learn that. And it's hard work for me to do it. But I feel like, because I'm not the boss of her per se, even though I do make a lot of decisions, because we can't run out in traffic. We can't have her stepping all over me, but by being able, it was a strange idea for me too, because with Mystic, I was much more traditional in my approach to horses. You know, I'm the herd leader, blah, 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 which is really kind of silly because I'm not a horse. How would I possibly do those same things? But with Chant, I've came so much farther in my understanding of my purpose with my horses. It's a totally different story. And I haven't made a lot of the same mistakes I made with Mystic. But by acknowledging that I would hear my horse say no and not go, well, we're just going to try it a different way. Now, if it comes to leaving the trailer in a fire, we got to get in there. We're going to do it my way.
Yeah.
But she has so much more free choice. And by doing that, our relationship has so many more options, and it's expanded in so many ways. Just the fact that I finally got to the place where my horse said no, and I said, okay.
So I have like a lot of tangents from what you just shared.
Okay, well, tell us some.
Yeah. So I'll start with, I actually consider myself part of the herd. And I feel like, like the other day, I went and sat near a tree and the entire herd came and sat with me, and we all went into like a cohesive space together of support. And I do consider myself part of the herd. I have dynamics with all of the horses in there. Not all of the horses are mine, but I do say to them that there are times I need to take leadership, and that's okay. And, one of the leadership times is farrier. We have to be safe. Our farrier has to be able to do our feet. Now we do farrier in the herd, and I don't have shoes on. So there's levels where I can manage that more. But I very much consider myself part of the herd. I would say that they consider me part of their herd. They all know me. I have a relationship with all of them. And I definitely not the leader. I would never consider myself the leader. That's their herd, and I come and go from it, but I do consider myself to be a member of it. And I would think if you ask them, they would say the same thing. And it's this interesting thing where I'm noticing a lot of horse people like to, the new kind of thing is to give your horse choice. And yet many don't love it when they hear a no. And so even you saying that you got to a place of honoring that no, one of the things that I always say, and like, it hurts my heart, but if you're not going to honor the yes or the no, why are you bothering to ask?
And a lot of people don't ask, but the horse will give a sound no, and then they step in to correct that or override that. And there's a real gift in listening to that no, because of what I did with Chant, I've learned so much more. And my reward for that from her is that now she has more trust towards me. There's only a few things that she says no on. But because I heard, and so she feels like she's not backed into a corner all the time.
Yeah. And I think for me personally, if we are wanting a mutual relationship, there are times that I have to say this is a yes. getting our feet done is a yes. We don't put shoes on. We have one horse that doesn't love the farrier. Now we've come a long way, but also for us, like if you gave her choice in that every time, she would say no every single time. The other side of that though is that her body hurts. She has crap feet. And there's a place where for her, she needs to gain her resiliency, because that behavior comes from bad farrier situations, as most do, and right? And on the flip side, even though that is a non-negotiable and that is not an ask from her, it's like, what can we do to make this more supportive for her? What can we do? Just as when you got to know, you're like, well, something needs to be done for these feet. You know that. So like, what does that look like for us? And how can we move forward in a relationship that's supportive? So both of us are being heard in this. The ask is that, well, for you, for instance, she needs something to help her, right? And so her obvious no is like, okay, what else can I do to support this? And I mean, good on you for like, you've taken the journey of like, hey, what else can I do? And this might be hard and we need to like negotiate around this, but this is part of what our relationship looks like. So I think what hurts me is when someone's like, oh, I'm going to go see if my horse wants a ride. And it's an obvious no. It's like, well, I want to, so I'm going to take you anyways. It's like, well, don't ask them. Do you know, like those are the situations where I'm like, if you are going to ask, you need to be okay with whatever the answer is going to be. And that goes for everything I do with my horses. Like the other day, one of my horses said no to food. And I was like, okay, well, that's your choice then. You don't have to like eat your grain bucket today if you're feeling full on your hay, like, or not brushing if they don't want to be brushed. It's like, just because that's my agenda and that would feel good for me. It's like, I also have a partner in this. And so honoring what they feel and stuff. And again, I'm on another rant around this.
No, I think learning to understand when a horse says no is a huge transition to a shift in your relationship.
Yeah.
And you were saying you're part of the herd, and I have to just have 2 horses, and sometimes they're with other horses, but right now they're not.
Yeah.
And so I always define my relationship because my dogs are there a lot when we're together. Like when I take them out, the dogs are always there too. And my experience of that is we all share spiritual blood. And so I call it's more of a family or a soul kindred that we have together. And that way, we all have our role to fulfill. And I'll tell you what, it relieves a lot of pressure off of me, knowing that I've given to them so much choice.
Yeah.
And like I said, my horses are nice. They're easy to handle. I only have a couple of things with Chant where she says no. And one of them, it's a problem. So I'm working on ways to help her see a yes there rather than, I can't force her. She's, 1,000 pounds. I can't force her anyway. And I don't want to, but I get a lot of flack from that if I'm riding with other people. So I find that I just ride less and less with other people until I can sort out that one thing.
Yeah.
But by learning to accept a no, it really changes your relationship with your horses.
Yeah. I mean, you even think of children. A child who continually hears no never wants to give you a yes. Why would they? They don't get yeses from you. Why would they, right? So I feel like it's the same thing with horses. It's like, if you're continuing to dismiss their no's, why would they ever want to give you a yes?
Because if you always override, right? Yeah. And then if you do that, you're going to have, okay, one of my tangents is hierarchy, whether it's in spirituality, religion, with animals. And like I said, a lot of things I have to be the final say on because I have the car keys. I open the gate. I mean, I do a lot of things that only I can do. But having hierarchy in any relationship to me or any philosophy brings a lot of damage. So once you get past the thing about it's my way or the highway, or I'm going to be the one who makes all the decisions, you have so much more malleability and fluidity within your relationship. And they actually it's amazing how much more they work with you instead of waiting. Number one, they can become completely dull and they're just little robots, or they can become so resistant or heartbroken. I mean, I've seen horses that are heartbroken because they're never asked. I've done readings with horses that are never asked, and they're heartbroken because they've lost faith in humans, that they never get considered for their perspective of anything.
Mhm.
So that was a tangent I have. One of them.
No, it's a good one. And I think, I think human perception of what hierarchy is can create problems. So if I think of our herd, I definitely believe there's a hierarchy in there. It's inevitable because there is horses
Right.
that lead the herd. It's very obvious who makes final says in that herd, right? The whole herd does not move until those two go, right? So there is that. And also the thing that you can notice, and even in your own relationship with your horses, is like sometimes one of us is the leader, but not always. And so not always is it those two. I watched the other day, the two horses at the bottom chose to take the horses down to the bottom field, and everyone followed, including the lead horses, if you will. So they have different roles in there. And also, if we're talking about our individual relationship with our horses, there are lots of times, I would say most of the time, I am listening to their lead of their yes and their no. And there are times, because I respect that, and because I acknowledge that, and because I can honor that for them, when I ask and I say, actually, and sorry, I should stop saying ask, when I am saying this thing needs to be done, right? I don't get a no, and it's okay, I will follow this time. And so, like the vet, the farrier, wound care, things like that.
Yeah. And there's a difference. To me, I guess I think of hierarchy because I was raised in a religious background, and then I dove really deep into spirituality, and I would go to groups and they would go, well, she's a high priestess, and it's like, so that, to me, that's hierarchy rather than the roles.
Yeah.
So the roles I have in my relationship with my horses, sometimes I lead, sometimes they lead. I had an interesting happen. Mystic is always lower on the totem pole, and Chant is the boss of her, and Mystic wouldn't have it any other way. So I had this issue that when I would tie them to the tie rack outside, sometimes I bring them there for their mash, or I bring them there to hose them off, or maybe groom them or whatever. And there's a horse on either side because there's a rail and then there's tie blockers there. Well, Chant would stand right here, and Mystic would always come around. And when she does that, her lead rope is kind of caught on the end of the wood, which is dangerous. The tie blocker isn't going to work. And I would put her around and she comes over. I put her around and she comes over. So I had a conversation with her about it. And she says, because in my world with her, I don't stand facing her. I'm behind her. And so what I said to her was, I understand that. And when you're loose and free, that's the perfect rule for you. But when we're together, I need you to safely stand over here so your lead doesn't get caught should you pull back. And ever since then, she stayed over there. But she had to understand that, okay, this isn't a herd rule going on right now. This is a horse and human thing that needs to happen. And I was amazed. I mean, from the very first time after I had that conversation with her, she started staying over there. But it was hard for her before to stand face to face. She should be behind Chant or at her flank. Yeah,
it's very interesting. And like, I think that goes to like the understanding. And a lot of the times in situations like that, it's like when you give them understanding, and I mean, they don't know English. So it's like the translation of the energetic understanding, right? It settles something in them and they can sit into that. And that's a great example of a horse who's given choice and voice a lot of the time. And so that's a situation where it's like, oh, okay, I can settle into this ask because I get a lot of choice all the time. And it's not, as you said, it's like when they're loose, that's fine. So that choice isn't being taken away. It's like in this one situation, how can we compromise?
Yeah. So that we're all safe, and mostly you.
Yeah, correct. You. I'm actually doing this as a favor to you. They don't always see
I know,
it, but it is.
I know. But she did trust me and do that.
Yeah.
Okay. So another thing that I'm always curious how other people interpret this is, how can you tell? I mean, we touched on it briefly, but that's because we both kind of have the same understanding. But if a person, say they don't know if they're in a spiritual relationship with their horse or not, maybe they're just starting to explore that possibility and that aspect of themselves and their horse. What are some ways that a horse will ask you to participate on more of a soul level? How would that appear? What are some signs or invitations that you've received? Well, I mean, your first example of getting your horse was a blatant example, but
So this is kind of what I always say, and I think that horses are grossly misunderstood in this realm. My belief and what I have come to know is I feel like we have contracts with all of our animals, regardless of how much you own them for. So I feel like innately, just because of our two souls coming together, we are already on a spiritual journey. Whether you believe that or not, my interpretation and my understanding and what I have learned is you are now in what I call a contract, and you have a journey together. There is a bigger reason, there's a soul reason that the two of you have come together. So automatically, like, so my first horse, Duke, is a great example. I knew nothing, and he was like, no, we journey together and we have so much to teach each other. And so for me, that's a contract. We had a contract together. Now looking back, I'm like mind blown. I'm like, there's so much that I learned from him, and I was able to give him and he gave me. And I had no idea we were on it. But if I look back and I reflect at the things he taught me and the things he asked of me and things that happened in my world, it's very obvious. And so I feel just from owning, I mean, I hate that word, but just from having that, you are already on a spiritual journey. And so what that looks like is very different for others, and how that presents is very different. And what I always say, and I think that those of us who are on this journey of partnering in a new way and being in relationship within our horses in a new way often look at people who aren't in those situations, or horses that aren't in those types of situations and relationships, and we feel bad. And what I say is, if they wanted something different, they would choose something different. And so there comes a point where I feel like there are horses that come into our world, like my first horse, Duke, because he was like, you're meant to be on this path and you're not getting there, and let's partner together and get you there, right? And so there are horses that eventually come into our world that have these asks of us, and if that soul is meant to get there in this lifetime, their horse partner will get them there. And I'm thinking of a horse partnership in particular in my head, and it's so funny because I was near him one day and he gave me an entire download of this like huge thing around expectations. And I was like, this is so interesting. And I just kind of sat with it. And 2 days later, his owner contacted me for a session because she was having issues with him that weren't resolving. And that was his way of starting to get her on the path. And so for me, it's like those little nudges of things that you don't know why you're doing it, or you don't know why you feel that call, but it's like, I'm going to do that thing. And I think that a lot of times people don't realize that those things very often are coming from our horse, because when she contacted me, I was like, oh, this is what the session's going to be around, because he already told me. And so she is someone who is very much, this is brand new to her. It felt very uncomfortable for her to like get a session for her horse, but it's like those little things that your horses ask, or those little things that you feel like help build the relationship. I feel like those are the things that are helping to build your spiritual connection with your horse. And in my opinion, it's already there. It's just humans are, or the owner or whoever, whatever you want to call yourself, are just starting to notice it.
Right. I see it a lot because I'm obsessed with, the whole spiritual connection. I see it a lot in people. I see how the horse is on the trail. I see how the horse is with them privately. There's a big arena by where I live. It's people rent space there, and I see it there. And I really, being an empath, I really have to get control of myself, because I see the horses asking for something else. And most of the people there, I think, are they take good care of their horses, but their horses and their people. And there is always going to be that element, but at the same time, we're all souls. And I just noticed that there's so much disconnect on a lot of the people there, even imagining their horse as a soul that might have something to say to them. And I think if they would just come to that observation, that their whole relationship would shift. Because once you get it, at least for me, once you get a taste of that, you just can't get enough. There's so much more. There's so much more. And I mean, I see it sometimes by the horses. Either they can be resistant, or they they become less loud. They become quiet around their human. And it's like, if your horse is normally louder than that in their body language and suddenly they're quiet, that's an invitation for you.
Mhm.
They're inviting you to come nearer and inside.
Yeah.
So that's there's a lot of ways horses ask, but sometimes we don't, unless you're looking for it, you don't see that something has shifted and the horse has invited you to a different avenue of relationship with them.
Yeah. And I would say that's the piece where I've come to trust that that horse, that soul, those souls are on the path that they need to be. And if it's not aligned and that horse really feels like that contract isn't going to be fulfilled, they will find a way out of that contract. And when I see things that are triggering, right, it's going to happen to all of us. None of us are perfect. I remind myself that that horse has chosen that to some degree. I mean, I've watched two horses take themselves out of the paddock and both of them ended up transitioning themselves because no longer was their contract aligned. And I saw that over time. And you just have to trust that it is going to be what it's going to be. And they are more powerful than we really give them credit for. We used to have this saying with my old horse. It was like our like stupid humanness, because it would take us so long to get to what he's trying to tell us.
Right.
Just him. And right, it's like our humanness. And even for myself, I do not pick up on every cue. There's no way. It's always easier to observe from the outside and see the things in a relationship because it's not our relationship to see. And so that's one of the things I always remind myself as well, is I'm sure people look at my relationship with my horses and feel like I'm missing things. And I feel like I'm doing the best that I can. And so, yeah, it's very stinking hard to witness and to be around. Like I'm at a boarding facility. There's got to be like, I don't know, like 30 horses there right now. And some of them are in there for training. And I have to trust that they're on the journey that they're on as horses and as beings and as souls. And I watch over time, I've been there for 3 years. I watch over time, slowly, maybe slower than I'm comfortable with, them teach their owner something, or, you know, their owner get an aha moment. And it's those little moments that for me, it's like, that is such a small success. And I give that as a prop to, you know, the horse soul of like, you have gotten your owner somewhere. And for the ones that I feel like maybe won't ever, right? I have countless conversations with people that, you know, look back on the horses they've owned and have immense guilt because they've now learned something that could have been way better.
Right.
And I think there's a layer where we just have to trust that the contract was between the two of them at that time was what it was. And it's for the learning of the future even, right? We never know the impact that one soul connection, one relationship is going to ripple out or has rippled out. I mean, I'm a huge believer in like past lives. So like, what is even that contract between them? Like, have they traveled previously? Are they going to travel again together in this lifetime? Like, we just don't ever know that. And so I think that's where, for me, I could sit into the, I don't agree with this relationship for like ever, and I don't know it. And so I think that's for me is what I try and remember is like, I don't know the vastness of what this is. And also I trust that if this horse wasn't meant to be in this contract and connection, they wouldn't be.
I've listened to and read a lot about contracts. That's not how I do mine. I believe we have agreements with horses for certain things, or any animal, just like we do with people. I understand the idea of contracts, and I just never have gone really deep into them because I think that what keeps me sane and out of prison is that I believe in reincarnation. And so that horse picked that life with that person that's so awful to them, so neglectful or so abusive. And I don't understand it, but I actually had a reading with what I call my spirit herd. And I was so upset over a man here that's just awful. I mean, I can't even go into what he does. And some of his horses I pass every day going to my horses, and they're hungry and they're thin. And I finally realized that I've been struggling with this man in my life, his energy, horses around me for over 10 years. And so what I got from that was, his horses are his. I said something about how I wanted to help and how that I don't understand. I can't afford to feed his horses too.
Yeah.
And the information I got was to let it be help where I felt like I really wanted to help, and to let the obligation go, because that was actually between him and his horses. And that once I let it go, I wouldn't have that angst all the time. And so I really shifted my perspective, and I stopped being resentful of, now I have to feed your horses again because it's been raining for 4 days straight and they have no food. So it's like, I'll just feed when I can, and I will let the rest go and accept that that's they had this agreement, this lifetime. I don't understand it, but you know, I've had my fair share of suffering in my lifetime. My horses tell me that all the time, that I suffer more than them because my suffering has been longer. They let go of stuff. And so I can hang on to a lot of things. And so my suffering is longer. So how a horse or an animal views it can be very different than how we view it ourselves. But definitely reincarnation keeps me out of prison. Otherwise, I would take matters in my own hands.
Remember this, and like as I'm sitting here listening to you, I'm like, my first horse is like reminding me of like, he lived 12 homes before me that honestly I don't agree with. And he, to the point where he was like, I'm ready to transition, basically. Because that's right. And I also remember, had he not journeyed that, we wouldn't have had the relationship. He wouldn't have taught me the way he taught me. I say all the time, he and I were parallel working on our trauma together. And I wouldn't have had that with him had he not lived what he lived. And to some degree, his soul came for those types of lessons and evolution. And towards the end of his life, you know, he had a lot of things and was very emotionally, you could call him emotionally unstable, like, you know, and like there was a time we thought he was colicking from seeing his previous owner. Like he was in a full blown, like very emotionally dysregulated. And the only person that supported that was me. As soon as I arrived, he immediately calmed, right? So and yet he taught me so much around that, and I continue to teach so many people around that simply because of the lifetimes he had before me. And so it's like, I think people saw him, and I met lots of people that knew him before, and his impact couldn't have been that great at the end of his life had he not journeyed what he journeyed. You know, just like I know what I've journeyed in my lifetime helps me show up in the way that I show up and support people in the way that I support people, right? And so it's like, those are the moments where, you know, if I had seen him maybe in his 5th house and I'm like triggered and this is so horrible, but at the end of his life, he's made such a great impact, and he will continue to be, because he's taught me so much around what it is to live lives like that. And those are the things that sometimes in the moments where we see the suffering, it's hard to see the bigger picture. And then I feel like you always just have to trust that we're getting something. And I feel like you could even, you know, even what they gave you around how to view what they're going through, it's like that in itself is a gift. And they're teaching based on where they're at.
My horse, Eli, True North, who actually renamed my business after he had transitioned. I was his 10th home in 9 years. And I don't think he had abuse, but he was treated as a piece of horse flesh. And so he was incredibly resilient. I suffered more by knowing that he was passed off for his strength and his ability, because he was in my world a long time. I never thought I would own that horse. I mean, I had other horses and I never knew. And then my one horse broke her leg. So I ended up getting Eli, but he circled in my world for a while, unbeknownst to me that I ever get him. And I looked up every owner that he had and got the story. So yeah, they do. Well, like us, we become what we are based on what we've experienced, and whether or not we've overcame them, or we've incorporated them into our growth, or we've carried them as our suffering, becomes the story that we tell, or the story that we live.
Well, and if you think of reincarnation, and then if you believe in soul evolution, it's like we're all in a lifetime to evolve our soul. So what is the evolution of our soul that needs to happen in this lifetime, even for horses? Like, what are they here to evolve within themselves? and within our relationships, right? So, and we don't always know that. And I mean, I keep bringing him up, but my first horse, like towards the end, it was like, you either move through some of these lessons or you're coming back to the same lessons, because soul evolution is just that. You know,
He told you that, or you told him?
I had to tell him that, because he was in such a state where he was like, this is becoming too much. And I'm like, and I understand that. But if you want to journey in this lifetime again together with me, it's like, I've moved through those things, so you need to as well. Otherwise, we're not coming back together in a contract, because our contracts are now separate, because now you're reworking on this. So for me, I also believe in soul evolution. And so it's also like, what are they here evolving within themselves as a soul? So
yeah.
Interesting.
Okay, so well, we covered a lot on all of this. Do you have anything else that you want to just maybe, even if it's abstract or something that would just maybe pop into your mind, or you wanted to say about the soul journey with horses and humans, on ways we understand it, maybe some of the difficulties of it, some of the benefits of it, anything? And for everybody listening to this, we didn't rehearse any of this, so I'm kind of putting her on the spot.
Yeah.
Sometimes that works.
Yeah, it does. I think I kind of have two things. And yeah, there's two kind of things popping into my head. Even if you don't really know what your soul journey is with your horses, like, I would like, be curious. And even if it feels hard to look at, because not all of, you know, I think some people think like our soul journeys are like light and airy and so beneficial and rah, 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 right? But like my first horse, it completely impactful and 100% vulnerable. And yeah, it took both of us letting go of what we have been through and stepping in forward. You know, that humanness that you say, like, we hold on to things easier, right? That was not an easy fucking contract to fulfill with him. It was hard. I feel like he took me into the depths of the depths and was like, and I'll support you there, but this is where we go. And so for us, that was our contract. And even if it feels hard or it feels emotional or it feels tough, there is something there in that. And I just, you know, encourage you to remember it's not always easy. And sometimes the learning is tough, and that's okay. And it doesn't make it wrong. You know, I have another horse. She's like someone just recently referred to her as like a little pixie fairy, because she basically is. Oh, you've met her, Addie. And yeah, Addie. She just is like, and that relationship is like light and it's spiritual, and she teaches me new spiritual practices all the time. And it's like, there's a lighterness to it. She's not taking me into the depths of myself, and neither contract and relationship are wrong. And yeah, I would say just be curious and remember there's like a vast array of what your spiritual connection with your horse can be and how that can show up and what that can look like. It literally could look like you sitting there. Right. You know, one mentor once said to me, what did she call it? Like mucking meditation, just being present while you're picking the paddock.
Yeah, that's a great meditation. Yes. When you're just doing that, or even just grooming, I can get into the zone if I'm just grooming, or I do that when I'm hand walking them when we go out to dinner. Yeah. Right. Exactly. Right. So I think that's where sometimes humans, like, we get ourselves caught up, is like, we feel like it needs to be this big thing where the skies open up and all the animals run in and it looks beautiful and help, you know, like all of the things. And it's not always. And most of the time it's not. It's like, what are those little things that you can be? It's more practical. Yeah, it is. It's really more practical. Yeah. Mystic is a fairy horse too. But with Chant, she's the one who introduced me to the idea of agreements, which are similar to contracts. I look at them a little bit differently, but when I first met her, I just went to volunteer because Eli had just died, my horse that had all those homes, and he foundered and I couldn't get the bone to stop rotating. So I was so upset. I just wanted to be away from the barn. So I went to volunteer at a rescue, and we were looking at all these beautiful Arabians out in these pastures. There had been a situation where a woman had bred all these really high dollar Arabian horses, and then she had a mental health issue and they fell into neglect, and animal control was coming to take them all and euthanize them all. You know, and like Chance stud feed was $4,500. I mean, these were not just horses that nobody cared about what they did.
Yeah.
And so another woman, they couldn't catch them because the woman had turned 4 stallions and 18 mares loose together on the property because she knew animal control was coming. And so there was mayhem and horses were, I mean, anyway, so they couldn't catch anybody. So they took they had another woman come in who had handled stallions before. And when she saw the herd, she couldn't let them be destroyed. So she took them all and she was just trying to rehome them as best she could so they wouldn't be euthanized. So I was looking at that herd of mares and no one really appealed to me, but in the back pasture, this one mare took her head, threw it up, rocked it backwards and put it back down. And I just zoned in on her. And what I realized in hindsight, not very long after then, was that we had made an agreement. And she was a young, untrained, I thought she was only 6 or 7. That's what she was sold to me as, but she was actually probably 11. And she had never had her turn. She had never been, trained to ride or done anything. She was lucky she lived on a bigger acreage most of her life. And so I picked her to work with, and that's who I have now, 3 weeks later, because I didn't go to get a horse, but it was all divine ordinance. And what I realized is that I thought when we made an agreement, my agreement with her was I will help you be as great as you want to be. Because she's beautiful. She's, like I said, very well bred, and she's so athletic and so beautiful. And my agreement was, you need to keep me safe. Because I'm getting older and I'm on a horse that's never been ridden. And what I finally came to realize, I thought she would want to do something like dressage. I don't do dressage. I'm a trail rider, but I was going to do my best or have someone else do it for me so that she could be the best she could be, because that's what I told her I would do. And it was only through knowing her through this relationship and communicating with her that her best is to let go of anxiety, because she carries a lot of anxiety, mostly in her head. She's had an injury in her poll. And so this isn't any deep, soulful meaning or any, blue ribbon transition that she wants. What she wants when she's her best, which is my agreement with her, was that she would be able to let go of anxiety and not suffer with that anymore. So there's so many agreements or contracts that we can have in the ways that they show up. They may be grandiose or they may be so simple, but when you think about it, if you can let go of anxiety, then your life is so much better. Yeah.
I mean, and we might never know all of our contracts with our horses. And I don't think I understand the depth of my contract with my horses. But I think, for me, at the core of what a contract is, and most of my learning from around contracts have come from the animals, is the why. Like, why the two of us? What are the two of us here to move through together, to teach outwardly, to learn within ourselves? Like, sometimes it is grand, and it is, this bigger platform of like moving out and like teaching things and like education and all of those things. And then sometimes it is, our relationship is this. And my other horse, I haven't talked about him at all, Indy, he's, he was the yes sir horse that did whatever you wanted. And one of our contracts together is like the journey of self-discovery. So it's like, I taught him how to discover who he is. And now he's a little bit like, well, okay, so now it's your turn. And also I want to show that to others. And so for us, like coming together, that's part of what our soul contract is. And that's not this big grand thing, but it's like, that's what it is for the two of us. And it's beautiful. And when, even in myself, I'm like, okay, what is it? It's, I was like, that's too simple, but that's what it is.
Right. And somewhat like if we're learning to, for people who are wondering if they're on a spiritual journey with their horse, or if this was a spiritual, like by design type thing, going back to Enchantress, after Marina had died, before I got Eli, I was looking for another horse, and I had went to this ranch. They had all these, I just saw a flyer and it was close to me. So I went up there and there were all these beautiful Arabians, and the cheapest horse she had, I think, was $6,800. And I just don't pay. I know that's not a lot of money for a horse, but I usually get a horse. Mystic was $500. And, I wouldn't sell her for $5 million. She's lame and I still wouldn't sell her for $5 million. And so they were just way out of my price range. I just didn't know what I was getting into when I went up there to look.
Yeah.
That was the same herd. That's where I had met her before.
Mm-hmm.
And it didn't work out for that to happen. But later she came back into my life. And so if you have a horse that's maybe infiltrating through your life, like Eli was, in and out of my circle of people I knew with horses, just getting passed around like 4 times since I knew him.
Yeah.
Pay attention to those things, because those are most likely an invitation in some way, even if you don't like own the horse. I hate that term, but if you are not, he doesn't come to live with you or whatever. Notice that, because there's probably some sort of request there for you to dive in on a deeper level, other than just knowing that horse. Oh yeah, that's so-and-so horse.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I think, even our herd that I consider myself part of, there's 11 horses, and I physically from my bank account own 2. Right.
Yeah.
So that's 9 horses that I have relationship with, deep connection with. I would say I have contracts with, simply from being near them. And so 100% they are. I would say, like, I keep going to contracts, and everyone has their own language and way of interpreting. But when I think of like 2 souls coming together, it's not always an ownership, right?
Right. It can be brief, right?
It can be brief. It can be not through you owning them. Like the horses out there, like I think of one. She is like she is a Frisian who needs to be in like a little tiny dog body, because that would be her best life, because you could carry her around and she could get all the snuggles and there would be no limitations on her. And yet she's this giant black horse, and she does not understand ownership, regardless of how much I explain it to her. She does not understand why I can't fulfill some of the needs for her, because she's like, well, we have a relationship. Like, why are you're doing this to these other horses? Why are you not doing this to me? And so for me, there's a layer of like, what I wouldn't want people to do to my horse, I won't do to theirs. So like the grooming, things like that. Do I pet?
It's hard. Yeah.
It's very hard. It is very hard, but it's also, I wouldn't appreciate not giving consent. And, but for this horse, she's like, well, I've given you my consent, and we have a very intimate relationship, and we have this thing that we do together. And like, so it's very interesting how they also, like, our human mind needs to perceive these things of cut and dry, and yet they don't perceive it that way at all. So, I would be curious about your circle, and not just your intimate immediate circle, like around you as well.
But sometimes it's just about answering and recognizing. Years ago, when I had Marina and I had Mystic, and I was boarding them, and they were in their own pasture, and the owners put in another, he was a Korab and a big gelding, and he was pushy and loud, and he would make me crazy, because I would go in to get my horses out to take them for a walk or to groom them, and he would come in, and Marina just wouldn't tolerate him. He would just butt in, and she would take Mystic, and off they would go. So then I have to get food to catch my horses, because he won't get out of the way. Diego is his name. And one day he had did that, and I had the halter in my hand, and he grabbed the halter in his teeth with a death grip and stood there and would not let go. It's like, I know what you want, but you're not my horse. But I did. I put the halter on him. I took him out. I brushed him, walked him up and down the driveway, and put him away, because nobody cared. And sometimes it's just a matter, and then from then on, he kind of relaxed on his pushiness, because somebody at least heard. Like when we just sometimes need to process out loud. No one gave you an answer per se, but at least somebody understood what you were trying to say, and it relieves a lot of the pressure and the angst. So notice that in horses in your environment too, even if they're not yours.
Yeah. Well, because they're all communicating.
Right. Okay, well, we're about at the end here. So you want to say how people can get a hold of you? And I'll also put them in the notes.
Okay. So I am most active on Instagram. My name on Instagram is Sacred Echoes. I'm also on Facebook, just because things move over to Facebook when you post on Instagram. So Instagram is really the way to kind of follow and get me, but I'm on Facebook as well. And then I have a website, which is sacredechoes.com. So any of those ways.
Okay, great. And I'm Delea with True North Equestrians, and my website is truenorthequestrians.com, and I'm also on Facebook under that. And Instagram, and you never know what's going to happen because I'm tech challenged. So sometimes things turn out okay and sometimes they don't turn out okay, but at least I'm there. So thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time on another Soul Horse Sunday.
Thank you.